Hello friends, welcome back, and by that introduction you know that you are being welcomed to our latest Halloween video. And boy, Halloween is just such a great spooky fun holiday, and there's something about it that just goes well with the pipe smoking mentality. I don't know what it is, but I've talked about this in the past, that I never appreciated Halloween until I started to appreciate pipes and tobacco, and the two things just go together in my mind for some reason. And as is tradition, I will start the Halloween video by opening up the coffin of my still unnamed Halloween pipe. This is the Jesse Jones Halloween Billiard that I will hold upright. There we go. Boy, Jesse just put some incredible attention into this. It's a beautiful pipe, smokes very well, but look at those skulls around there. It's just a lot of fun. The pipe just screams Halloween. Now I say unnamed. As you know, if you followed me, as you know, I only smoked this about the week before Halloween, up until Halloween. And I use it as a prop in these videos, frankly. I only smoke Haunted Bookshop out of it because I'm just kind of that cheesy that I think Haunted Bookshop should be a Halloween blend, although I do smoke it all year round. And last time we talked about this pipe, I said, I really got to come up with a name for it. And I've struggled with it. I've gotten some great suggestions, and I don't like any of them. No offense to the people that suggested them. But we got Vlad the Inhaler and Count Puffula and Smokenstein. Yeah. But I don't like to give pipes. Well, first off, it's kind of odd that I give pipes names, but it's just something that I think of when I pick them up. And I don't like to choose things that are too elaborate or too outrageous. But as I pack this pipe, I'll tell you that I think I have a name now. I think that will be clear as we get into the topic of today's video. And anyone who's a classic horror fan already knows the topic of today's video, just simply based on the introduction. Plus, I probably put it in the bumper image. But today we're going to be talking about the life and career of Bela Lugosi. Now, Bela Lugosi was an incredible actor, and I find it sad that there's not more known about him. There's many sad aspects to Lugosi's life and many controversial aspects to his life. I am not going to be talking about those. I've decided that there's more than enough of that negative information out there, but there's also a lot of really good positive stuff about Lugosi that's not talked about. So I am going to give an admittedly biased view of the man, but I think it's the side that hasn't been told, and I'm not trying to deny the other stuff, but I want to focus on the positive for these videos, and that's what we're going to do. And when you think of Lugosi, if you're at all a classic horror film, you of course immediately think of Count Dracula, and that opening video clip was intended to evoke that image. Now, Haunted Bookshop just tastes extra good in the Halloween pipe. Now, Count Dracula, I'm not talking about a vampire. I'm talking about the actual character of Count Dracula, and Lugosi created that character. As we'll talk about, he put a lot of himself into it. And when we think about that character, he's a very interesting monster in horror films. I'm going to contrast him to the Frankenstein monster, because we talked about Karloff's portrayal of the Frankenstein monster in the last Halloween video. Karloff made this incredible creature come to life that was horrible and frightening, but at the same time you somehow felt compassion for him. And that's the power of that movie, I think. You actually feel for Karloff's monster. Dracula, at least Lugosi's Dracula, he's a suave, debonair ladies' man who glides through the night and is hypnotizing people and it gets everything that he wants. And sure, there's murdering and blood-sucking and evil, but there's something about that character that you don't have compassion for him, but you identify with him, and you think to yourself, you know, maybe not. I wouldn't mind being that guy, but I wouldn't mind having that guy over for dinner some night. There's just something about Dracula that, despite the evil, he's attractive to us, and I really think that's the power in Lugosi's Dracula. It's I want to know this, but yet I know that it's evil and darkness, and I need to stay away from it. So let's talk about the man. So Bela Lugosi was actually not named Bela Lugosi at birth, as many actors are not. He was born Bela Ferenc Dezső Blasco, and I've probably murdered most of that name because it's Hungarian and I know nothing about the Hungarian language. He was born October 20th, 1882 in Lugos, Hungary. Now, interestingly, Bela grew up not very far, about 50 miles away from the castle of Vlad Dracul. And Vlad Dracul is Vlad the Impaler, who was the original Dracula. He was the inspiration for the myth of Dracula that developed in Hungary and surrounding areas. It's far outside of the point of this video, but if you want to know more about Vlad, he was a terrible man, but interesting historical character as well. Lugosi was not fond of school. He stayed in for a while, but at a very early age he left school and he went into a life of manual labor. He worked on railroads and in mines and things like that. You know, just whatever he needed to do to keep himself going. But he apparently had this idea that he wanted to be an actor, and it's not clear. I haven't been able to find any early reports of him saying that he was studying acting or he wanted to be an actor. It just, he suddenly in 1902 makes his first stage appearance, and from that point on he was basically unstoppable. When Bela began his stage career, he changed his name to Bela Lugosi. Lugosi simply means from Lugos, Hungary, which is where Bela was born. Now, he didn't make his first stage appearance in horror films or, as Count Dracula. Lugosi's first stage appearance was in a classical Hungarian theater. Hungary had a great tradition of classical theater, and this included classics like the Shakespearean classics, but also there was a very large repertoire of classical Hungarian stage productions. And Lugosi, he was a member of the Budapest National Repertory. There we go. And this was a very prestigious group of actors. He was a famous romantic star of stage, and this is a little bit difficult for us to reconcile with the Bela Lugosi that we know from Dracula. He was a leading man who was considered a romantic lead. Women would swoon when Bela would walk out onto stage. And between 1902, which was when his first appearance occurred, and 1914, Bela was in over 172 performances as part of the Budapest National Repertoire. So really a very distinguished acting career. In 1914, this career was halted when Lugosi decided to enlist during World War I in the Austro-Hungarian army. And this was not a draft. He decided that this was the right thing to do. And he was assigned to the 43rd Royal Hungarian Infantry, first serving as an infantry lieutenant. Lugosi saw quite a bit of action during World War One. His unit was sent to the Eastern Front, where they fought in Galicia against the Russian forces, and Lugosi showed enough ability to gain entry into the Ski Patrol, which is kind of an interesting unit. And this unit found himself engaged in a brutal winter battle in the Carpathians, the Carpathian Campaign of 1915. And this was an amazingly brutal battle, with the Austro-Hungarian forces having an army of about 100,000, and they lost 2/3 of that during just this one battle in less than a week. So just unbelievable. Oh, I'm sorry, it's less than 3 weeks, but still, just absolutely unbelievable. And this battle has largely been forgotten, but the truth is that the fighting that occurred in the Carpathian Mountains during those 3 weeks is considered by many historians to be the most brutal conflict to have occurred in all of World War I. So, actually, it's believed to have been the most deadliest conflict to have occurred during any war to date. So, really a remarkable thing that Bela lived through in this. He was wounded twice during his service, and he was ultimately discharged in 1916 on both physical and mental grounds, and that's all we know about the discharge. So, you know, he had a very distinguished acting career early on. Then he went on to have a distinguished military career. To go back to this you know, Lugosi as a ladies' man, because that really is a big part of his character. He actually fought in 11 duels while he lived in Hungary, and this is interesting because there was really, at this time, only one reason why men would fight a duel in Hungary, and the reason was that almost always you were caught with another man's wife. And Lugosi did this 11 times. Shortly after his discharge from the army, he moved into the Hungarian film industry, which was just sort of beginning at the time, and he became known as a very well-known romantic actor. He was actually considered to be, and I don't know that this was, I think this is a later moniker that's applied to him, but he was considered to be the Rudolph Valentino of Hungary. He had dashing good looks, deep, piercing blue eyes, and it just, his overall looks and the way he carried himself made him a favorite with the female audiences in Hungary. So, towards the end of World War I, Lugosi became very involved in politics. And it was during this time that he backed the communists in Vienna, and ultimately the communists took power in Hungary, and their regime lasted a very short time. So there was a communist movement in Vienna. They moved into Hungary. They were able to take power. It lasted about 3 months, and when it fell, the communists were on the outs, and Lugosi had to flee the country. So Lugosi left Hungary, moved to Vienna, and in Vienna he began working in the film industry, ultimately in the Berlin film industry. He was in a number of films in Germany, and those included things like he played an Indian in The Deer Slayer, and he was in F.W. Murnau's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And this is really interesting because this was a year before Murnau directed Nosferatu. Now, Nosferatu is considered to be the first vampire movie. Silent film, a very notable image. You'll know Nosferatu as soon as you see the picture that I'm going to put up. Now, Murnau pirated the story. Bram Stoker's heirs were still alive and were still maintaining rights to the story of Dracula. Murnau did not get rights. He actually called the creature Nosferatu instead of vampire. He called him Count Orlok instead of Count Dracula. And despite these changes, Stoker's heirs sued Murnau for doing this. And the court ordered that all copies of the film be destroyed. They agreed with Bram Stoker's heirs that Murnau had violated their rights, and that all copies of the film needed to be destroyed. Fortunately, a few have survived. It's really a great silent movie if you haven't seen it. You got to appreciate it for the time that it was made, but it is the first vampire movie, and it's just interesting to me that this was being, conceived and created at the same time that Lugosi was there, beginning his career in horror, working on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In 1921, Lugosi immigrated to the United States, and as soon as he arrived, he formed a theatrical company in the Hungarian community of New York City. This led to acting on Broadway and ultimately to his career in film. He had his U.S. screen debut in 1923 in a movie called The Silent Command, where he played a foreign saboteur who was trying to destroy the Panama Canal. And he was also in a number of romantic comedies and dramas during the silent film era, still able to portray this leading romantic, the romantic lead. In 1927, and this is the date that will live in infamy, Bela Lugosi was cast as in a theatrical adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So this was an official adaptation. They had the rights to it, and they did it as a stage show. And Lugosi spent a lot of time touring and performing as Dracula on the stage, night after night, refining the character, finding out what works, getting feedback from the audience. That is why his portrayal of Count Dracula is so good. He formed it in this laboratory of live theater. The reports from his performances are incredible. Women fainted and shrieked and had to be escorted home by their husbands or had to be attended to by nurses. He was able to, now keep in mind, it's a product of the times. He was able to evoke something that had never before been done on stage. This pure evil, this combination of evil with a very handsome, attractive man who had this compelling ability to hypnotize his victim. No one had seen this before, and people reacted to it emotionally. All of this, he of course became famous for this role, and he wound up starring in the 1931 release from Universal of Dracula. Now, interestingly, Lugosi was not the first choice for Dracula. And the way these things work, it's just really kind of funny. So, Lugosi was the first choice to play the Frankenstein monster. But Lugosi didn't want it because it was a non-speaking role, and because he didn't want to do makeup. So he said no, and Universal was disappointed, but they cast Karloff, and the rest is history. And in the case of Dracula, Universal really wanted Lon Chaney, the original Man of 1,000 Faces, and Lon Chaney was very well-known horror actor at the time. And Lugosi knew this, and he wanted the role, but because he had made it famous, and he basically invented the role on stage. And yet Universal was saying, no, we're going to get Lon Chaney to do this. And this bothered Bela Lugosi quite a bit. But then Lon Chaney died of cancer, and Universal was left without a lead, and they immediately recruited Lugosi for the role, and he, of course, took it. And as they say, the rest is history. But that'll be an important point to come back to, this interaction with Lon Chaney. Lugosi defined the character of Dracula. And as I said, he really did this on stage and then brought it to life on film. And it's surprising to me that despite the fact that we can't think of Dracula without thinking of Bela Lugosi, he only played Dracula twice in all the years that he was active in the film industry. Once in the 1931 classic, and then again in 1948 in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Didn't even get top billing. Those are the only 2 times he played Dracula. Now, he did play a vampire many other times, but we're not going to count that. Actually, we will count it because, let's face it, that's who we think of when we think of Lugosi. But really, the Dracula character was only portrayed twice on film. And I keep referring to the fact that he created this character that's such a part of our consciousness now. What was it that he defined? Well, if you think about what Lugosi did for Count Dracula, the first thing that I think of are his eyes. He had these deep, piercing eyes, and they were filmed so well in the Dracula movies. The lighting around them and everything just really made you believe there was something supernatural about this man as he stared into your eyes. Oddly enough, his hands were incredibly expressive. His fingers were very long, and he would use them in a long, arching fashion. They were actually identifiable, and oddly, I find it really interesting that in the 1948 Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, the first time you see Lugosi, you don't see his face, you see his hand coming out of a coffin, and just the way those arched fingers are coming up over it, you know immediately that is Bela Lugosi, just from his hand. And he used those very effectively on the stage, and on stage the actor often has to exaggerate what they're doing in order for the audience, which is some distance from the stage, to appreciate it. So these overly exaggerated movements of his hands and the big arching of his fingers were very important for stage and very effective on film. And lastly, the thing that he brought to the role that did not exist prior to his stage work was the idea of Dracula as a hypnotist, as a mesmerist. Dracula was able to just sort of stare into the eyes of his victim and do something with his hands, and they would just swoon. They would just follow him and do his commands. This was not in the original Bram Stoker novel. It's something that Lugosi added to the role in the stage production and brought with him into the film world. And there's something very important that Lugosi did not add to the role of Dracula. And we need to talk about this because it's a popular misconception. So you ask anyone to do an impression of Dracula, what will they do? Well, they'll put on a fake Hungarian accent of some sort, Eastern European accent, and they'll say something along the lines of, "I want to suck your blood," or something like that. And then they will tack on, blah, blah, blah. Lugosi never said that. And he didn't like that people said that. He actually felt that it was people not respecting the role that he had created. And he wasn't all uptight about this. He did plenty of things that were sort of popularizing Dracula and cashing in on the image, but he didn't like the blah 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 because he never said that. And this has been picked up on by some more recent adaptations of the Count Dracula story.
Oh, he'll get his fangs. He's just like me. Look at him.
Blah, blah, blah.
I don't say blah, blah, blah.
So as mentioned earlier, Universal originally wanted Lugosi to play Frankenstein, considering him then to be the new Lon Chaney. And Lugosi refused this. He, as I said earlier, he didn't like the heavy makeup. He didn't want a non-speaking role, and that's how Karloff got cast. And this basically led to Karloff taking off and becoming the horror movie icon that we know. Actually becoming more successful than Bela Lugosi. Karloff and Lugosi starred in a number of Universal films, 3 in total: The Black Cat, The Raven, an adaptation of Poe's story, and a movie that I really like that not a lot of people have seen, and that's The Invisible Ray. Both Karloff and Lugosi played great characters in The Invisible Ray. But in all of these, he never had top billing. He always was playing second to Karloff. He made several horror films without Karloff, including a very good version of Murders in the Rue Morgue, and an independent film made in 1932 called The White Zombie that I personally have not seen, but it gets very good reviews, and I'm going to have to track that down at some point. Now, in 1933, a very important event occurred in Bela Lugosi's life. He married Lillian Arch. Now, Lillian was 19 years old in 1933, so Lugosi was marrying a much younger woman. Also, this was, I believe, his fourth marriage. So, like I said, there's a lot in Lugosi's past that is easy to point to and say, "Ooh, look at that." But yeah, he got married quite a few times. But while much has been made of Lugosi's womanizing and frequent weddings, one of his weddings only lasted a couple of days. One of his marriages only lasted a couple of days. Lillian really was his true love, and they clearly were in love. This clearly was a true marriage, and they remained married for 20 years. During this time, he made many films, but he was typecast in the horror genre, and there was nothing that he could do about that. He tried to make a few non-horror films, and he did, and they had limited success. For example, he appeared in the comedy International House with W.C. Fields that was made in 1933. An unexpected place for Lugosi to show up. The character of Dracula, as defined by Lugosi, became part of the culture, and he took advantage of this, as I mentioned earlier. He played the part in public appearances, made a variety of sort of public spectacles, occurred in part of a Paramount short called Hollywood on Parade in a sequence called Betty Boop Meets Dracula. And here he uttered the famous line, "Betty, you have booped your last boop." But by the time the late 1930s came along, Bela was finding difficulty finding work. And this was a problem because at this time his son was born, his first and only child, Bela Jr. He was born in 1938, right in the midst of unemployment. In 1939, Universal made Son of Frankenstein. This saw Boris Karloff back as the monster, Basil Rathbone as the son of Dr. Frankenstein, and Bela Lugosi in the new role of Igor. Now, this film somewhat revitalized his career, and he had a number of appearances in films, including a brief but very memorable scene in Ninoshka with Greta Garbo, and another appearance in a Universal film with Karloff in Black Friday. In 1941, Lugosi was really hoping that he would be cast in Universal's latest effort as the Wolfman. But Universal cast Lon Chaney Jr., as any fans of horror know. And at this point, Chaney essentially replaced Lugosi at Universal. And to the point where Lon Chaney was actually cast as the vampire in the 1943 film The Son of Dracula, which just, you've got Bela Lugosi just sitting there without a job, and you're putting Lon Chaney in as, it just doesn't make sense. But that's what the studio did, and Lugosi apparently held a grudge against Chaney for the rest of his life. He felt that Lon Chaney had significantly hurt his early career, Lon Chaney Jr.'s father, and now his son was usurping the roles that Lugosi considered to be his rightful roles. So, in 1943, Lugosi returned to the stage. He revised his role in Dracula and played in other plays, like, interestingly, Arsenic and Old Lace, which is one of the roles that Boris Karloff played on stage quite a bit and had made famous in his early stage career. Lugosi was also in a number of B-movies, and he hosted a few horror-themed radio shows, but this was not the career that he had hoped for. In 1945, Lugosi once again starred with Karloff in an RKO production of The Body Snatchers. Now, originally RKO had planned to just cast Karloff, but Lugosi was once again a rising star, and there was a public rediscovery of those early 1930s horror classics that kind of helped the propel this along. It's the reason why Universal was even thinking of making a horror film at the time, because they had fallen out of favor, but by this time the public was looking for more horror movies. And this convinced them to actually rewrite the script and incorporate Lugosi. Previously it was just going to be Karloff, but they wanted to cash in on this new renewed interest in the 1930s films. But as the 40s came to a close, the genre essentially fell out of favor. Lugosi's career once again waned, and the one bright spot was the previously mentioned 1948's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. In this film, Lugosi once again played Dracula for the second and actually for the last time. As if he wasn't having enough difficulty with being typecast and having difficulty finding a job, the McCarthy era began. And the McCarthy era cast a shadow over Lugosi's career. Several people called into question his patriotism. Various newspapers, including the New York Daily News, accused him of being a communist sympathizer. Lugosi strongly denied these accusations and actually asked to appear before the House Committee on Un-American Activities in order to address these accusations. But, you know, the McCarthy operation was not interested in bringing up falling stars, and this was all about attacking the big names and trying to bring them down. So he was just not considered a priority, and he was never called before the committee to speak. Despite this, it's clear that he supported Bela Kun's communist revolution in Hungary. And this led to him needing to flee the country after World War I. So he did clearly have communist sympathy. Whether it changed during the time he was in the U.S., we don't know. It really doesn't matter. The point is that these accusations essentially ended Lugosi's Hollywood film career. He continued to make personal appearances and television appearances. For example, he appeared on the Milton Berle show. These were largely forgettable and not very good for his career. In the early 1950s, he attempted a revival of the Dracula stage show in England. And the show flopped. It just simply did not work. The audiences had moved on by this point, and they just weren't interested. In 1953, he went through a divorce with Lillian. After 20 years of marriage, this absolutely devastated him. By this point, he had problems with alcohol, and the public had had a number of public fallings out, actually dating back as far as 1944. But despite that, Bela clearly loved Lillian, and he never fully recovered from the pain of their separation. In the early 1950s, the infamous director Ed Wood had the idea to restore Lugosi to prominence in the movies, but of course, Ed Wood did not make very good films. Lugosi was desperate for work, and he appeared in Wood's Glenn and Glenda, which, yeah, we're not going to say anything more about that. Technically, Lugosi's last screen appearance was in Wood's infamous Plan 9 from Outer Space. However, I think it's really important to point out that this movie was not made until after Bela Lugosi was dead. Wood took some footage that he had of Lugosi from a previous project, just pictures of him dressed in black, lurking around graveyards and things like that, and he just patched them into the movie. And if you've ever seen Plan 9 from Outer Space, you know that they're just patched in because it doesn't make any sense. Lugosi never knew that this film existed. He never knew that the script existed. And I like to believe that if he did, he would not have wanted anything to do with it. In 1955, a major event occurred in his life. He publicly announced that he was going into a rehab facility for his morphine addiction that he had developed while being treated for leg pain. This got a lot of bad press, and it's unfortunate, but this is the way the press works. They don't focus on the positive. He was sincerely trying to get his life back on track. And when he left the facility, he said he felt like a new man as he left the hospital. So he really was sincerely trying. While in the facilities, he received fan letters from a fan by the name of Hope Lanninger. And Lanninger, a few months after he left the hospital, became his fifth wife. The relationship was rocky, and Hope Lanninger has been described as a gold digger and a fanatical, starstruck woman and everything else. They remained married until his death. You can read lots about Hope Lanninger if you want to. Bela Lugosi died on August 16th, 1956, of a coronary occlusion, heart attack, at the age of 73. He was discovered in his bed by his fifth wife, Hope, upon her return from work. His funeral service was held at 2:30 on Saturday, August 18th, at the Utter McKinley Mortuary Chapel on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. Prior to the service, his body lay in state in full Dracula garb. He was actually buried in his Dracula costume. And there's a lot of controversy around this point. Hope said that it was his wish to be buried in his Dracula costume. It actually is now known to be, or strongly believed to be, a decision made by Bela's ex-wife Lillian and her son Bela Jr. As sort of a maybe publicity stunt. At any rate, the man was buried in his Dracula costume, whether he wanted to be or not. But when you think about it, it's kind of sad because it's the ultimate typecasting. Now, there's a lot of stories around his funeral and death, and they're probably mostly apocryphal. Story that's often told is that Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff were viewing the body of their old friend who had risen out of so many coffins as the vampire, and Lorre, or in some version Karloff, said, "Come on now, Bela, quit putting us on." This is a great story, and I wish it was true, but it's not, because Boris Karloff wasn't at the funeral. He was living in England at the time, and he did not make it. So that's unfortunately not true, although I do love the image of Karloff sort of bent over and in that wonderful voice of his saying, "Come on, Bela, stop putting us on." Sadly, he was not at the funeral. However, Vincent Price wrote in his biography about the funeral, and he claims that he was viewing the body with Peter Lorre, and Lorre commented to Price as they were viewing the body, "Should we drive a stake through his heart just in case?" So it's equally entertaining, and we get Peter Lorre in both of those. Regardless, this is the final chapter on this man's life. The funeral was well attended, and there are some reports that it was well attended because people like Boris Karloff made a lot of phone calls and lobbied to get people there. There was some sadness at the end of Lugosi's life, and he had really fallen out of favor with Hollywood. So the fact that the funeral was well attended, and the fact that he was respected in the end, and that a few friends were able to remember him in a kind way at his funeral, makes me feel a lot better about the end of the man's life. So, as we always try to do in these videos, we want to try to bring it back to pipe smoking, because that's really what this channel is about. And Lugosi was a frequent pipe smoker. And we get some insight into that from an interview that was done with Bela and his wife Lillian while they were still married, obviously. And Lillian was asked about his smoking habits, and she had some very interesting things to say. So Lillian says that he consumes so much tobacco that we have to use a denicotinized variety. So that was interesting. Apparently Lugosi was a very heavy pipe smoker. Lugosi then pointed out that Lillian was a better pipe, quote, stuffer than he was. And she says, well, yes, you always said the pipe tasted sweeter when I did it. Drawing on a pipe is the only way you can tell if it's packed properly. I like doing it, but I have never been tempted to smoke a whole pipe. I enjoy it just that much. So Lillian was packing and lighting the pipes for Lugosi. And there's actually another interview, it's not the one that I'm quoting here, where she said that he smoked cigars constantly when he was outside. But as soon as he walked in the house, he put the cigar down and he expected her to have the pipe ready for him. So it's just really touching that she would do that for him, and that he really found it to be a better pipe when she did it. I couldn't find a picture of Bela with Lillian and a pipe, but apparently he also convinced his fifth wife, Hope, to continue the tradition of packing his pipes for him. I could find absolutely nothing on Lugosi's tobacco choices. I also could not find information on denicotinized pipe tobacco, so that was an interesting point. He was noted to be a customer at Kramer's in Los Angeles, so I'm assuming he smoked one of the Kramer's blends. When I visited Kramer's and talked to the owner there, she did not mention him as one of the people that would frequent the shop, and they did not have a blend that was named after him like they do, for example, Danny Kaye. So whatever he smoked, it was one of those fine Kramer's blends, and fortunately we can still get those now in a tinned version. There are, however, while we don't know anything about the tobacco, there are many pictures of Lugosi with a pipe. He smoked a variety of shapes, and he is reported to have actually had a very large collection. But he was not the best at maintaining his pipes. He apparently would smoke until the cake built up to the point that he couldn't fit a finger in the bowl, and then he would give the pipe away. Apparently he had Lillian clean his pipes, but there's no indication that she owned a reamer. Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed that. It was really wonderful for me to be able to go down memory lane and revisit some of these great old films, and also learn more about the man Bela Lugosi. And I think in honor of the man, in honor of this holiday, and in honor of our memories of Bela and all the work that he did, I think this pipe that spends most of the year in its coffin will henceforth be known as Bela. I hope you all have a fantastic Halloween. Enjoy it. Watch a spooky movie. And just have some good fun. And of course, enjoy a nice pipe. So thank you all for watching, and until we speak again, I'll look forward to talking to you all again very soon. Goodbye now.